You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Amy Mason Doan.
Well, thanks for tuning in to Author Stories today. We've got a fantastic show for you. Go to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show. Any way that you download podcasts, you can listen to it there. I'd like to talk about some sponsors before we get started. Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experience. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques, learn from a vast collection of free writing resources, make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one. Join Scribophile today at scribophile.com. For the Words is a unique writing motivator unlike anything I've ever seen. For the Words is an online writing platform which motivates writers of all backgrounds to increase their word count through gamification. Writing can be challenging, especially when you need to consistently produce a high output of words. By injecting a little fun into that routine and using daily rewards to promote a healthy writing habit, For the Words makes it easier to reach those word count goals. We're a community of bloggers, professional authors, college and high school students, research scientists, gamers, and first-time writers from all over the world. Come for the words, stay for the fun. It's forthewords.com. That's the number 4, thewords.com. Writers. The internet is one of the best tools for research and creativity, but it can also be one of the biggest hindrances to productivity, distracting you from doing the seat-in-chair, hand-on-keyboard work. Rescue Time gives you an accurate picture of how you spend your time to help you become more productive every day. Spot inefficiencies in your day and become better at managing your time. Create a goal, like spending less than 1 hour per day on email, to help you stay focused. Set an alarm to tell you when you spent more than 2 hours a day on Facebook. Try Rescue Time and use our special discount code for 30% off our Rescue Time premium account by going to rescuetime.com/authorstories. Let us help you rescue your time. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Amy Mason Doan back on the show with me. She was with us about a year ago talking about her brand new debut novel, The Summer List. When you guys are hearing this, will have just released her follow-up to that called Summer Hours. I've had the book for a couple of months now. It is fantastic, right in vein with the previous book. If you loved her previous book and thought that it was a great summer read, you're going to absolutely devour this book. Welcome back to the show, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you back. So how's the past year been?
Well, it's been busy. I think when we spoke, I think I probably told you I was most anxious about being a new author and, how the book would do and how I would deal with balancing writing and the promotion that comes along with, being an author in 2019. But it's been amazing. I've been able to pivot between my writing life and kind of getting out there and meeting readers and getting the word out about the books. And I just agreed to write 2 more books for my publisher, so I'm hard at work on those. Yay, I know. But it's really been lovely and, not easy every day, but I've really enjoyed it, especially, as an over 40 debut author. I'm really appreciative that I can do this for a living.
Yeah. I remember specifically the last time we talked about that feeling of compromise, that especially in your journalistic work that you had been doing, that it's so easy to say, I am a writer because I'm doing this, but not actually working on the things that you loved, and that you had this desire to be a writer, but really held that to yourself for so long. Now that that debut book is out and you've gotten to get it in front of people and get their reactions and responses, and, people telling you that your story connected with them, is it as fulfilling as you hoped it would be?
It really is. I mean, not every moment of every day,
of course.
It's tough. Writing is always going to be lonely and scary and frustrating at times. But it really has been full of little moments of joy, and I'm just trying to be grateful for them. A handwritten note from someone or a reader who really seems to appreciate what I was trying to do. Those things are important to me, and it's amazing to me as obviously a lifelong reader to be able to get into someone's head for 5 or 6 hours, and I really appreciate being able to do that. So, it's fulfilling. It's still scary, and I've accepted that it's always going to be scary. I don't think book 3 or book 4 or book 5 will suddenly be easy to write. I've learned that much, but I am enjoying it.
The launch of the last book, comes with a certain gift in that no one really knew what to expect. And as a debut author, when you're working on that book, leading up to it, a lot of times nobody knows you're working on it. Maybe a couple of family members, some close friends, maybe. But there's no real stress about it because no one is putting any pressure on you. It all lives within you. Well, now that has come and gone, and book 2 is coming out. How do your priorities as an author shift when going to that next book? Yeah,
I mean that's such a good question because it is harder. You do have people that you don't want to disappoint. The summer list had such a great response, and that was thrilling, and it really seemed to move people in a way that made me happy. But I think that if you focus too much on what the response is going to be from the outside world, that's just paralyzing. So Summer Hours, the book that comes out or is out now, is something I had started long before and shelved. So I loved the story. It was just really an idea for a kind of a female spin on The Graduate. And I thought that was a really powerful book, but I really didn't have the skills to write it and didn't know how to write it. So that was helpful to me. I knew what my second book was. I knew it was this idea that I had had before. And so I was able, after a while, to just tune out expectations and just try to write the book and please myself and deliver what I think is a really strong story. And luckily, the response seems to be quite good. Knock knock. But I think that way lies madness. Really, if you focus just too much on what people are going to think. I always want to deliver a strong story, but beyond that, I think you've got to just work on your job every day in front of the computer.
Reader expectation is such a weird thing to balance because on one hand, you need to have the freedom to write whatever story it is that you want to write, because the one that's coming from deep inside you is the one that's really going to connect with readers. At the same time, if you write a story that no one understands or, it clicks in your brain, but other people just don't get it or whatever, then no one's going to buy the book. So, you have to balance this thing about the thing you're passionate about and marketability, which is something that a lot of people struggle with, and rightfully so, I guess. But are there any things that you think about when you're writing? Is there any kind of gut check things that you go through that, like, is this going to connect with people? Do you think about those things at all?
I absolutely do, because I have thrown books across the room in frustration before as a reader, and I certainly don't want to spend years of my life working on something that is ultimately, really frustrating to read. So I think setting a book aside for a while so that you can come at it with fresh eyes is critical. And then to me, as a reader, one of my top priorities is an author that has an affection for their characters. I think you can feel that. I think there are some writers who write brilliant books that just don't have that, and they're just not my type of read. So in my books, I think I'm always going to strive for that, strive to show it, strive to show strong settings, characters making logical decisions, and just a story that keeps you turning the pages. That is what I do as someone who writes fiction that's both commercial and layered and thoughtful. I like a strong story. You mentioned the secret in the summer list. That kind of propelled the reader forward. In the new book, it's in summer hours. We've got two people driving up the coast to a wedding, which seems really simple on its face. Classic story of two people driving to a wedding and seeing people from their past, but the surprise in that book is we don't know who the passenger is for quite a while in summer hours. So I wanted to make that satisfying, and I wanted to really deliver the information, the reveal on who this person was at the right time. So in that way, I do have the reader, in mind.
Right. We talked last time about writing the emotional beats of a story. And when you were saying that earlier about those characters that connect and the settings, you're really thinking of these characters like they're real people, and that it's your job to tell their story. Do you approach it that way?
I do, and they feel like real people to me. I mean, they talk to me, they start to surprise me, if it's going well.
Right.
Very rarely. That doesn't happen to me at the beginning. There may be authors who feel that way at the beginning about their characters, but I really need to get to know them, and I need to be able to visualize everything. Setting is really crucial to me, so I need to kind of know where they are. Where are they standing when they're talking to each other? Are they looking at each other? And then, if it's going well, they kind of defy all my careful plotting and start to surprise me. And that to me is the magic and what's addictive about writing fiction.
What does that look like in the beginning when you're discovering your characters and kind of feeling them out? Are you writing to a scenario that you've already planned out and then just trying to see how they fit in that? And do you ever find yourself where maybe you write a certain amount of pages or chapters and then say, oh no, these characters are actually these people, and you have to erase that and start over?
Oh, all the time. Definitely. And that is so hard to do because it's so satisfying and kind of comforting as a writer to see that word count tick up, whether you're using, Microsoft Word or Scrivener. You've got your 30,000 words, and, that feels safe, right? So just to cut because all of a sudden something just doesn't feel right, it's painful, of course. But as I'm writing novel 3 right now, I love the story, and I know the characters, but, I just had to cut a big chunk of words, and that's never easy. But I think it's a crucial part of the process. Like, those words are still there somewhere, those dead ends or those things that I explored that didn't quite work out, they're there under the surface, and they help me get to know the characters better. So I think that's just an inevitable part of the way that I write, at least.
And sometimes I'll clip that out and put it in another file and say, oh, I think these actually may be different characters. Yeah.
Scraps. I have a Word document called Scraps, actually. And sometimes they're quite big scraps, but they, and maybe I never use them again, but it kind of feels good to have that file.
Oh, and it's fun to read back through those sometimes, because I had a file like that once, and I had just one line, that I liked, but it didn't fit with what I was writing. And I said, I'm just going to save that. And one day I went back and I read that, and it just kicked off an entire story. And that became my book writer's block. It was just amazing how this one thing, it just wasn't for the time I originally wrote it, but it's funny how that happens.
Yeah, and I love when that happens, or maybe that combines with another idea, and all of a sudden it's just something amazing. But you got to be patient. It doesn't always happen when you want it to happen. But it is really satisfying. When I look at everything I've learned, and again, it's not going to be easy, but I think that I'm beginning to kind of ride out those waves a little more easily, and I expect them.
Well, when you're working on a new book, and your new book Summer Hours is out now, when folks are hearing this, when you start thinking about a new story, what's the first thing that comes to you? Is it a central character? Is it a scenario that you've thought of? Is it a setting? How does it usually start coming together?
Yeah, well, with these two books, with the summer list, what started the whole thing was I was camping and some kids were doing a scavenger hunt, and that got me thinking, and that became, the adult plot of the summer list. With Summer Hours, the ideas came to me because I used to sneak out of my first job out of college and go to the movies. So I'm much older now, but when I was 21, 22, I worked in real estate writing newsletters. I had been an English major. And so I was very lucky to get this job, but I was, pretty miserable. And I used to sneak away in the middle of the day and go to matinees in Berkeley and Oakland. And I, with a friend who also hated his job. So that became the seed of Summer Hours, which is a book about playing hooky from your real life. It's a book about trying to figure out who you are. It's a book about being afraid of selling out and turning into your parents. The classic kind of coming-of-age themes, in The Graduate and other works that I love. But that was the image. So a memory, I guess you could call it. That was the fragment, and then I built around that. I didn't know who the people were, but I thought this was something pretty powerful and interesting to me. Who would these two people be who snuck out of their jobs to go to movies? Why would they do that? How bratty, right? But also how tempting and interesting.
And how much like the rest of us, we want
exactly.
we fantasize about doing that and being able to get away.
Yeah, and that's really what the book is about. There's a present thread and a past thread. So in the present thread, my characters are driving up to a wedding. They're escaping their real lives for a long weekend. And then my main character is flashing back to these other times that she tried to sneak away from her real life, because it was in those times that she kind of figured out who she was. So I love it, and I'm really excited to have it out in the world. It's a long road.
Well, tell me about Becc from the Summer Hours. You start thinking of these people that would do this. How does an actual person start forming in that, and how do you start discovering who she is, and kind of what's your character building process?
Yeah. She is pretty autobiographical. I'll admit it. I don't think I can try to hide that. She's much bolder than me, but at least on the surface, she wants to be a journalist. I was a journalist. She went to Berkeley. I went to Berkeley. So I'll just get that out there. But I don't think she's a, quote, Mary Sue. She does things that I never had the guts to do. So in a way, it's kind of that wish fulfillment. And I learn about my characters by testing them, by making them go to extremes, by throwing, some misery at them and seeing how they handle it. Some worst case scenarios, how do they react? And dialogue, I think, also really tells us a lot about a character. So I think about vocal patterns and body language as well. So she's an interesting person. As an adult, she's so she's so organized and she's got everything planned, She's going up to this wedding and she has her game plan, and of course it just goes awry. So I loved the play of, who she is in her 30s versus who she was as an idealistic, 21-year-old. That taught me a lot about her too, just comparing her growth over that span of years.
When you have the two different timelines, the present time and then the flashback, do you write those at the same time? Do you alternate chapters? Or, I've met some people who will completely write one timeline and then completely write the other and then figure out how they intertwine. Which one are you? I
am that type. I think I need to know what happened in the past to inform the present storyline. And I need to have an idea, at least, of how I'm going to knit them together or braid them together. In the summer list, there were 3 storylines, so it was quite intricate. In Summer Hours, there were only 2, so it should have been really easy, right? But, of course, it wasn't. So we have one storyline that's in the 90s, late 90s, and then one that's in early aughts, like 2000. So I do need to know. I need to know why they are the people they are as adults, what happened long ago to make them like that. And to me, it just feels better to have the past locked down and then work on the present. And then, of course, they both keep changing and changing and changing as you revise.
Right. We talked last time about, and we mentioned earlier, the writing to those emotional beats. Has your outlining process changed in this novel, and then maybe working into your third novel that you're working on now? Has the planning and the kind of laying out the writing process? Are you still using the same method?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a planner. I have my flashcard system. It's very low tech. I put flashcards, color-coded flashcards on my living room carpet, and I need to know like what I'm going to be feeling, what the characters are going to be feeling, and what I want the reader to feel at different points. But I think what has changed is I'm more comfortable skipping around and tackling those scenes that I want to tackle. And I think the fear. There's still fear. There's always fear. Fear that it won't be good, fear that it just won't be the beautiful thing that you've envisioned. But I'm able to manage that more and just really seize the scenes that I want to work on that day, if that makes sense. So I can jump around a little more and have more confidence that I'm going to be able to work on the scenes that lead up to that, And I'm a little less nervous about cutting those words because I know that I can, if I put the hours in, I will be able to deliver the story. But yeah, I'm still a planner. I would not consider myself a pantser, as they say.
Right.
But there's always a little bit of both. But I'm definitely more of a planner.
Gotcha. One thing that I love about your books is the levity and the humor that you will interject at just the right times when things are getting a little tense or when things are really heating up and we're kind of nervous for the characters. You have this way of letting us off the hook a little bit just to ramp us up again. How important is humor to you as a writer?
Thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate that because it's so important to me. I think especially when you're dealing with such heavy issues as I tackle in both books, you got to lighten things up a little. And to me, that's the way I live. And sometimes, when we're most upset, we might make a joke. Certainly the way I interact with the people that I'm closest with, too, I think. So it is important to me, and, it has to feel natural. I think there are definitely kind of rom-com elements to the road trip, and I love that. I think it's satisfying on that level, but it's more of a dry humor, at times. There's some physical comedy that's in there that I really love, but I wanted it to feel natural. So it's in the present thread of Summer Hours where Becc and her passenger, if we don't know who he is for a few chapters at least, they're obviously not talking much. We don't really know much about their their background or their history together, but we know that they're not really in a warm relationship. And I loved throwing things at them that would make them warm up to each other. So in that way, it's kind of the classic road trip novel. And so there's a little physical comedy and a little bit of, a lot of, I would say, that dry, intellectual humor between them as they banter or as they think.
Well, what I really pick up on is that, when you've been friends with someone for a while and you get this sort of humorous shorthand and inside jokes and that dry kind of wry humor like you're talking about, that usually only comes from people that know each other. And what I notice is that by including those, you are bonding these characters in a way that you could never do with just pages of description by telling us all of their exploits that they've done together. When we see how they interact that way, it does more than any amount of writing them into a relationship. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, I love that. So I hope I've done that because I definitely try to. I think, Becc and the people close to her, they have their little shorthand, their language, and sometimes less is more in those moments. And that's the way real people speak. That's the way real friends are with each other. We have a whole shared history, and we don't have to do a lot of explaining. And as a reader, I don't love a big explainy paragraph. I think readers are smart, and I trust them to kind of get that feeling that, these are two people who are close,
Exactly. What have you learned in delivering and now publishing the second book and now working on your third book to help you stay on target for a publishing schedule that you have now, which you didn't have, before the first book? You have all the time in the world to work on that book, but after that, then you have to be on a schedule. Are there any things that you've learned, maybe about the craft of writing, but more the mechanics of being a writer?
Yeah, it is a very different thing to write on a deadline, and I was a deadline reporter for years. I mean, I could churn out a good story in 15 minutes with a quote and everything, but it's very different still when it's fiction because it's so personal. And I think what I've learned is to be a little easier on myself. I've learned that I can write anytime. I don't need to be alone in the house with hours and hours. Sometimes you can get a lot done in half an hour, waiting in the car. You can get some dialogue refined. You can brainstorm the next chapter so you're ready to go in the next morning. You just have to keep going. And again, as you become more familiar with that fear, it's at least for me, knock, knock, it's less likely to send me into weeks of not writing or weeks of being convinced that I'm terrible and I won't finish. It's more like, okay, there's that fear. I know this. I've felt this before. And I got through it before, and the only answer is to just keep going. And even if what you write that day feels like junk, there might be something amazing in it. So pushing through the fear because you do have a schedule, but you also have a team of people helping you. My editor's amazing, and we have a close relationship in that I can text her and send her a chapter or a scene I just worked on and not be afraid that what she's going to think. So that's really helpful if you're feeling a little stalled or confused about where to go with something.
Do you revise as you go? I think you mentioned like going over previous things so that you're ready for the next writing session. Or do you constantly go back and tweak the things that you've written already?
It's a constant battle for me not to polish as I go because I'm a perfectionist and I was an English major and again I was a journalist for so long. But I do find that it really trips you up to try to make things cosmetically perfect. In the first draft, the first draft is just to figure out what the heck the story is and what's going to happen, and then you just have to have faith that you are going to be able to polish it up and make every scene shine. So I try not to, but I don't always succeed, and sometimes I can't resist,
It's such a hard thing. I've got a friend, Nick Cole, who says you never go back and look at anything that you've written. You go straight to the finish line, and I always catch myself going back saying, maybe I could tighten this paragraph up just a little bit, and you start feeling the story change underneath you if you do that too much. And so while I definitely understand the sentiment, it's difficult to stick to sometimes.
It is.
Yeah. Well, the new book, Summer Hours, is out, available everywhere. Amy, when someone finishes the book and closes the back cover, what do you hope they take away from it?
Oh, I hope they see themselves in there, whether they're 20 or 50 or older. I hope they recognize that universal feeling and kind of finish it with a satisfied sigh of recognition. Oh, yeah, that's what it's like to be out in the world, and I hope it feels like real life.
Absolutely. Well, I love it. I love everything that you're doing, Amy. I'm a big fan. If people are just learning about you, and we'll put a link to last year's show in the show notes so people can catch up, is there a place where they can connect with you online and dig into all that you do?
Yep, absolutely. I'm on Instagram at Amy Mason Doan. My website is amymasondoan.com. I venture onto Twitter as well, Amy L. Doan. I'm everywhere. And I love hearing from readers.
Excellent. Well, we're going to send everybody to see you. Amy, thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show with me.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Author Stories. Go to hankgarner.com to find all of the archives of the show, and be sure to subscribe while you're there. Now stay tuned for a special audiobook clip from Richard Gleb's The Jason Crane series.
Jason yanked the coils of safety rope to one shoulder and heaved them out the attic window. The bundle bounced over the roofline and dropped to the yard below. He tightened the harness, making sure the shoulder straps were snug over his sweatshirt. He threaded his rope through the braking device, tested it, and clipped everything to the carabiner at his navel. So far, so good. Fireman Mike would be proud. His stomach flipped as he neared the octagonal window. Had he tied the correct knots? Would he get himself killed? Weeks had passed since Mike's tutorial but he had to attempt the break-in now, while both Van Brunts were at the Christmas Eve service. He swung his legs through the window and felt for the roof. His sneakers gripped the shingles and he wriggled out, grateful for once to have feet as big as snowshoes. He pulled on a ski mask and sang, "Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can." He lowered his body. Wind punched him in the jaw like a supervillain, surprising him. His sweatshirt rode up and snow burrowed into his navel. He looked down but couldn't see his feet. He relaxed his hands and put a few ounces of weight on the rope. Clots of snow broke away, dove over the edge, and took far too long to hit ground. He drew his rope around the pipe and pulled tight. Now he could drop. No, you will not drop. You will rappel. You will rappel very safely. He backed towards the edge, towards the point of no return. The backyard lurched into view. It was a 4-story fall, and he'd probably hit the stairs on the way down. He sledded helplessly. His legs fell, swung, and kicked the side of the house. Alarm bells went off in his head. He gripped the rope. It looked like nothing. A shoelace. Jason Crane, you're a damn fool. He went limp and fell over. The rope gave a jolt, and the harness tried to castrate him. He twisted, trying to save his poor descendants. He began to spin. His arm bashed through a row of icicles. The spin slowed, reversed, and at last he came to a stop with his back to the house, dangling over the backyard. "Thank you, rope. That's a good rope. Well done." He tried to turn around, but couldn't. With patience, he worked out a method of kicking in circles and managed to press his sneakers to the side of the house. He needed slack. He gathered his loose rope to the small of his back and disengaged the brake. Zip! He fell fast, all his weight on the rope now. His feet, planted, shot up over his head. The brake caught him, and the rope vibrated as wildly as a guitar string striking a note of panic. Jason heard a crunching sound and looked up. The leaf gutter crumpled and poured a stream of bitter ice water into his eyes. He snarled and wiped his face, dripping humiliation. Jason rested a moment and stared at his reflection in the glass. He was an enormous Macy's balloon drifting over New Jersey, tethered at the navel like Underdog. "How the hell did you get up here, kid?" He did an awkward split, one foot above the window and the other below, hanging sideways with his weight on one hip. He closed his eyes and reached for the sill, crouching against the side of the house. His fingernails found the weather stripping, and he tugged. Locked. He cursed and tugged again, anger rising. He grabbed the frame with both hands and pulled with all his spider strength. Something popped. The window rose and the curtains splashed out. Jason dove headfirst into the fabric, wriggled and kicked, let out some rope and fell with a whump into his archenemy's lair.